Okay, getting right into it today. We are doing a deep dive on something, well, autism and parental alienation. We've got tons of research and articles to dig through, and we're going to break it all down for you. You know, one of the things about parental alienation that makes it so difficult is that it uses those stereotypes about autism
Yeah.
against the parents. It's like, how do you fight that? And
Yeah.
that's why we're here. We're going to give you the tools to see through it all. And luckily, we've got expert speaker here who is like amazing at understanding these really complex situations.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep.
So parental alienation, basically, like emotional manipulation on steroids. It's not just about bad-mouthing your ex. This is like a really calculated effort to damage a child's relationship with the other parent.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. So you're going through a divorce, which is already so emotionally charged. And then on top of that, you've got the challenges that come with autism, like navigating social cues or regulating your emotions. It just seems like the perfect setup for this kind of manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we see happen is that the stress can actually make the autism symptoms even worse.
That's something I hadn't thought about, how the stress of it all can actually make the challenges of autism even more difficult. So for someone on the spectrum who might have difficulty reading those social cues, does that make them even more vulnerable to this kind of manipulation?
Absolutely. Next, you imagine someone is constantly gaslighting you or twisting your words around, making you doubt yourself. For someone on the spectrum, it can be so much harder to pick up on those subtle changes in tone that neurotypical people might notice more easily.
Wow, it's almost like the person doing the alienating is exploiting the very things that the autistic person is already working so hard to manage.
And it's so important to remember that even though
autistic individuals
might be more vulnerable, this can happen
to
absolutely anyone. Parental alienation, it doesn't discriminate.
So what are some of the signs that might indicate that this is happening? Besides, the other parent just coming right out and bad-mouthing you to your kid.
There's a lot of different tactics. Some of them are very subtle and some are more obvious. Denigration, for example, could sound like, well, your dad doesn't understand you because he's autistic. And that kind of statement, it plants seeds of doubt and it plays into those biases about autism that are already out there.
That's awful. It's like they're using the diagnosis as a weapon.
Unfortunately. That's a pretty common strategy. And then there's also restricting access. So the other parent might forget about visits, or they say, oh, the kid's too busy to talk on the phone. It's all about control and isolating the other parent.
Yeah, they're basically building a wall between you and your child. It's heartbreaking, but just knowing that these tactics exist is a good first step.
Yeah, absolutely. Recognizing those signs is really the first step to protecting yourself and your child. So we've talked about some of the realities of parental alienation, but now let's dig into how this stuff actually looks in real life.
Yeah, because I think having some examples will help people understand how these things can play out.
Definitely. One of the sources we looked at was an article from Cheap ABA, and really goes deep into the struggles autistic parents face during divorces and custody battles. And it also talks about how even some positive traits of autistic people can be used against them.
That's wild. Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Sure. So let's say you have an autistic parent who is really honest and direct when they talk, which, a lot of people see that as a good thing. But when there's parental alienation happening, the other parent might say, see, your dad is always so blunt and critical, or he just doesn't know how to be nice about things.
So they're basically taking something that's positive and making it seem negative, making it seem like the autistic parent is uncaring or insensitive.
Exactly. And this can be really effective, especially if the kid is going through a rough time emotionally. They might be more likely to believe those kinds of suggestions, and then they start to see their parent in a bad light.
It's almost like they're using those unique qualities that make the autistic parent special and turning them into weapons.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it goes beyond just communication style. They might also target sensory sensitivities. Like if the parent has a hard time with loud noises or being in crowds, the other parent might do things on purpose to trigger that when the kid is visiting. So the autistic parent looks like they can't handle things.
That is, wow. That is so messed up. It's like they're setting them up to fail as a parent.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. But it does happen. And the worst part is it can also play into those stereotypes about autism, because someone who doesn't really know much about autism might see the parent struggling and just assume that they aren't capable. of being a good parent.
So it's like a double whammy. They're taking advantage of the parents' vulnerabilities and then using those same things to make people think that all autistic people are bad parents.
Right, and that's why it's so important to have people involved
Mm-hmm.
who are trained to recognize this, like therapists and counselors
Yeah.
and judges and custody evaluators. They need to understand the unique challenges
Yeah.
that autistic parents face.
Yeah, because if you don't have someone who knows about autism, it would be easy to misinterpret what's happening.
Exactly. You can't just rely on general knowledge. We need people in the system who can see things clearly and who can make sure that the kid's best interests are the priority.
So we've been talking a lot about the challenges and how autistic parents can be targets. But I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about strengths, because autistic people bring a lot of unique strengths to parenting too.
For sure. We've mentioned some of them, but it's important to emphasize them. Like many autistic people have this incredible capacity for empathy, so they can be super tuned in to their child's emotional state and provide a lot of understanding and support.
And like we were talking about earlier, that honesty and directness, that can be such a good thing in parenting. It helps build open communication and trust.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the consistency and predictability that many autistic people thrive on. That can create a really stable and secure environment for a child, especially during a divorce when things can feel chaotic.
Yeah, that stability can really help a kid who's feeling lost and confused.
Definitely. And then there's also the special interests that a lot of autistic people have. Those can become something they really bond over with their kid. Like imagine a parent who loves trains, sharing that with their child, building model railroads together, or going on train spotting adventures. It creates this whole world they can explore together.
That's such a cool image, and it reminds me that we need to change how we talk about autism. We need to focus less on what people can't do and more on all the amazing strengths and all the potential.
I completely agree. It's about recognizing that neurodiversity is a gift.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things today. How parental alienation can happen, how it can be even harder for autistic parents, and all the amazing strengths the autistic parents bring. So as we head into the final part of this deep dive, what do you think is the most important takeaway from this conversation so far?
It's a good question. I think the biggest thing is that awareness is key. We need to be aware of how parental alienation works and how it shows up and the specific things that autistic people have to deal with. Because once we understand that, we can start challenging the stigma and pushing for change and building a more supportive world for autistic families.
So we've covered a lot of tough stuff today, but I want to end things on a more positive note. We've talked about recognizing parental alienation and the special challenges for autistic parents. But now I want to talk about what can we do? What can we do as a society to support autistic families who might be going through this?
I think it all starts with understanding. We need to move past all those stereotypes about autism and see that it's a spectrum, not just one thing. Every autistic person is different with their own strengths and challenges.
Right. It's not about putting people into boxes. It's about understanding that neurodiversity is just part of being human and embracing those differences.
Exactly. And we have to challenge that idea that autistic people can't be good parents.
Yeah.
Because actually, their unique strengths can make them amazing parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we've been talking about, that honesty and consistency and that deep empathy, those are all such important qualities for building strong relationships.
For sure. And we need to do a better job of highlighting those positive stories.
Yeah, let's hear more from autistic parents who are thriving, who are proving that autism isn't a barrier to being a great parent.
Exactly. And along with those individual stories, we need to see change in the system. Like we need to make sure that the professionals in family court, like judges and lawyers and custody evaluators, that they really understand autism and parental alienation.
So they can make decisions that are truly in the best interest of the child without letting bias get in the way.
Right. And we need better resources for autistic families. Things like legal aid and therapy and support groups. These could be so helpful for parents who are struggling.
And of course, community is so important too, creating spaces for autistic parents to connect and share their experiences.
Absolutely. It helps them feel like they're not alone.
So to everyone listening, if you're feeling lost or overwhelmed, or even if you're just curious about this topic, we hope this deep dive has given you some insights and some tools to use.
And please remember, there's no shame in asking for help. There are people out there who understand and who can support you.
We'll have some links in the show notes for this episode. with some helpful resources. So be sure to check those out. And to everyone, let's remember to be empathetic, to try to understand each other, and to believe in the possibility of positive change. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time, I guess.